Hello and welcome to the fifth lesson. We've covered a few concepts by now, and in this one we're going to be looking at one of those concepts finally a little more into detail, which is going to be current wave states and future wave states. We're going to be discussing the interaction between these two ideas. And if you've heard the phrase that League of Legends is nothing more than just a language, then these concepts will help you determine that language that holds true, because it is nothing more than just a conversation between players. And so we will start understanding that over time. And in this first video for this specific concept, fifth lesson, and really this is just a building block again from the future or the previous videos we've had, and again is a very important stepping stone for the future videos that we're going to be talking about in this channel. It's going to be really important for you to understand why future wave state and current wave state is important, how they interact with you, and how you can use them to determine if a fight is happening or if nothing's going to happen in a given situation. While understanding these concepts, you're going to be able to take a game played at a lower level. So when I say this, I'm talking about gold, platinum, diamond, etc. And it will start making sense to you. You will understand that even through chaos and the madness that there is, that is solo queue, there is a method to it, and that model is consistently followed the higher and higher levels of play that you go. Of course, that model breaks down, but that model breaks down because of the lack of understanding that most players will have. And that understanding will build the higher level you go. In fact, in order to get to that level, you have to build that understanding, and these videos are pretty much the way that I intend to help you do that. So now let's go ahead and get into the video. We're going to go over a few concepts, and then of course we're going to go over some actual footage. We're going to be looking at how those concepts apply, and you're going to see them being applied in a real game. So this is the fifth lesson, current wave states, interactions with future wave states. Let's get into it. Okay, so moving forward to this first lesson here of the fifth session now we have in our guide of league content that we are slowly making up to 100 sessions. This is lesson number 5. We're going to be talking about something really crucial. This is the basis of really understanding if something is going to occur in the game or if something's not going to happen. And that is looking at future wave states versus current wave states, okay? Or in better words, current wave states versus future wave states. So really, we'll be talking about this in detail, but I just want to quickly scope here. The correct play, so current wave states and future wave states allow you to determine the correct play. In order to get the LP, you need to make the right plays. The correct play can only be made with the correct information. Now, of course, information can be problematic, especially with the internet, because we have a lot of random concepts, right? Random concepts are, you know, there's 100 concepts, let's say, but these are like usually wrong, mainly because it's like gold, platinum players thinking the same thing over and over again. And the problem is, and this comes back with community influence, is that majority of the people playing the game are thinking about the wrong things. And so there's only a small percentage of people actually thinking about the right things and then constantly practicing the right things, is why they find success. And really, your goal as a viewer or your goal as a student is to find out is to filter bad concepts from the right concepts. Now, of course, in this channel, I'm going to be doing my best to explain all of the right concepts, and I've talked about this as well in my previous lessons. This is number 5 now. We've discussed this between lesson 1 all the way up to 4 as well, in some variation we did. Of course, going more into detail with this current lesson here that we're going to be doing. So a lot of concepts are happening. A lot of random ideas pop into most people playing the game's heads. Now, the reality is only maybe 5 of those 100 concepts actually matter. if you can get really good at these 5 things over and over again and ignore the other 100 things that people are telling you to do, you will succeed, because this is nothing more than clutter. Now, a lot of this comes down to community influence, right? You go on Reddit, you go on other Discords, you go even ask your friends, and usually the general consensus of how to play the game is quite faltered, mainly because most people, if you look at the ladder, it is comprised of mostly silver, gold players, and it's easy to determine that these level of players don't understand anything that they're doing, and they will talk to you about the game about and when you listen to what they have to say, it's only going to confuse you further, because they themselves have essentially constructed a pathway which leads nowhere but makes sense to them. And so the idea of coaching is to disassemble those thought processes and align players to start thinking about the small amount of concepts in the game or thought processes that actually do matter, that do lead to success. And a lot of what you're going to be suffering through when you're filtering correct information versus incorrect information is really just making sure you're finding the right channels. Now, anything that is usually not the right channel to look at would be anything mainstream, which would be skill cap, pro guides, etc. These channels are, of course, are quite good for general concepts. These are fine for very, very new beginner players. Some videos, of course, are more geared towards higher levels of play, and I'm not going to say all videos are bad. Some of them actually are quite helpful, but there is a very, very small percentage of those. And as a student, as someone learning who's not completely adept in the craft of League of Legends, you're going to have a harder time understanding what is right from wrong versus what is more relevant versus irrelevant. Mainly because the mainstream content channels will just throw out everything to you, and you're kind of just sitting there figuring out what's going on. I mean, if you've watched these channels for some time now and it hasn't worked, that enough should be a self-indicator as to what's going on. So when we look at this lesson specifically, we're going to be looking at current wave states and future wave states. And what these, again, just to reiterate, allow you to do, why these are so important, is because they allow you to determine the correct play. If you cannot determine the correct play, you cannot make the right play. You cannot actually understand what is going on, and you'll never be at the same level as other players. Now, really, all that it is high rank, or LP, I guess you can call it. We'll just call it high rank. Is really nothing more than the correct play, and the correct play is determined through the right information, the right mechanics, and a little bit of luck over a course of many, many games. And that is how you get a high rank. If there's any kind of formula for high rank, this would be it. This would be it. It is nothing more than high LP is really nothing more than making sure you have the right play, which is information, the right information, which, again, this helps you understand. This will get you the right information. This will not even correct play, it's the information that you'll be getting from this. And through that information, you can make the correct play with the mechanics and a little bit of luck, because teammates exist. Multiplied by hundreds and thousands of games, and you will get high rank. Okay, so let's move on to a more detailed example of what current wave states and what future wave states are, how they can provide us information, and how this information can be used to make the correct play. This, along with some mechanics and, of course, a little bit of luck, through a consistent practice schedule and a consistent, not even a schedule necessarily, but a consistent practice over months and years, you will find success on the ladder. Let's get into it. Looking at this game here, we're going to be talking about, again, current wave states versus future wave states and how they interact. And really, well, what is a current wave state and what is a future wave state? Well, it's fairly simple. Let's look at top lane, for example, here. This wave, the first wave that is on our screen here, this is the current wave. Okay, I apologize. I don't have my pen here, so I'm not going to be writing that well. So just bear with me here. This is the current wave. Or I'm going to actually try to write less so it doesn't get so messy. But this is the current wave. The future wave is the wave coming out of the nexus. This is the future wave. The current wave and the future wave share a relationship. They share an interaction. Based on what is happening with the current wave, the future wave will affect it. Now, the future wave is relatively static because all it really is just minions coming out of the nexus with full HP, and occasionally, of course, after every 3 waves, or every 3rd wave, you're going to notice that there's going to be a cannon as well. So that's really the only consistent factor. The future wave is relatively consistent. It's just a wave coming out of the nexus. The current wave is very crucial to look at. Because what happens really? Well, in this lane, whoever's getting pushed will be able to get level 2 on the future wave, which means that the current wave requires you to start autoing level 1. If you can get a push on the current wave, you'll get level 2 on the future wave. Okay? Let's look at a different example here. Let's look at bot lane. Let's call this the current wave. The second wave has now crashed. Right? So there is minion interaction. This is now the current wave. The current wave is always the wave that the players are currently looking at. This is the current wave. The future wave, in this case, looking from blue side, is the 3rd wave, which is, as we discussed, a cannon wave, which is 6 minions plus a cannon. So this is the future wave. This is the current wave. So what's going to happen here? If we kill off a bunch of red minions and we crash this wave into the tower, we don't actually gain anything from that. So that's not what you want to do. But that's not the point of the concept here. If we kill all of the reds and we crash the current wave into tower, the future wave will buffer. And what I mean by buffer is that we'll end up aligning here. And just like how a video buffers when you have slow internet connection or something, it lags, the wave in itself will meet here. The 3rd wave will crash. Which means that then we can call the 3rd wave the current wave, and then we can call the 4th wave the future wave. In fact, even the 5th wave and the 6th wave is also the future waves. But we're not going to get into that right now. We're going to look at we're looking at this from the most basic perspective. Just because the waves haven't spawned doesn't mean they're not future waves. But looking at this here, let's say that we slow down the 2nd wave, which is ideally what we should be doing. This is the correct play, which I'm about to describe here just now, is we slow down the push and we end up getting level 2 on the future wave, which or level 2 on the actually we'll get level 2 right now, but we'll have 2 on the 3rd wave as well, so we can build up. We have control for the 2nd wave, which means we have control for the 3rd. We have control for the current wave. We have control for the future wave. We want the future wave to stack up with the current wave, and then we can crash, or we can just, kill them or something. This is really crucial to understand. So, what am I looking at? The current wave determines the future wave. There is minion interaction. So this could be wave 1. This could be wave 2. This could be wave 3. This could be wave 4. Okay? The current wave, wave 1 is arriving. We get level 2, hypothetically, let's say, because we get push on wave 1. We get level 2 on the future wave. Now that the future wave is here, the future wave becomes the current wave. So now this is the 2nd wave, let's say, for example. Let's say this is the 1st wave. We're pushing. The 2nd wave is here. Okay, we get level 2 on the 2nd wave in a solo lane. Now we have level 2, and we have a larger minion wave, which means that now the 2nd wave is the current wave, and the future wave would be the 3rd wave, as we looked at in that bot lane example. So it's really crucial to understand how these minion waves interact with each other. Let's go ahead and skip to a random point in the game. And we can determine, in fact, let's look at the first few ganks that happen in the game. And we're going to primarily look at the jungler because, again, we are determining, right, we're trying to determine information by looking at current wave states and future wave states. Junglers predominantly do this. So as you can see here, there's no way a gank bottom will be really possible here, considering how low we are on the red side. And of course on blue side, we know that we're never really going to be able to gank enemy bottom lane because they're too pushed in, and our laners have our blue side laners have complete control of bottom lane at the moment. There's nothing we can do. If Graves was to come down, it would be a really, really detrimental play to the red side team. Of course, unless they hit level 2, right? As they will here. So they hit level 2, and now it's possible. But why is this possible? Well, the second wave is the current wave. The future wave is the third wave. The future wave will lock with the current wave because of where the future wave is. And because the lock is in an angle that's close to where we can fight and get a gank off, Graves chooses to do 3 camps into bottom lane. Had he gone into wolves, he would still be level 2, which means that now the future wave, which is 3, would not be able to be played on because he's on wolves and still level 2. And so it will allow blue side to kill off the third wave, crashing the third wave into tower, either finding a base if the opponent isn't completely low, or continuing to maintain control of the lane, not having any obligation to be playing up in this more danger area of the lane for blue side. And so it would be beneficial. And so instead we do 3 camps, which is red, Raptors, Gromp into bottom lane. And this is quite a high tempo, fast-paced clear because we are playing on the third wave. We are aware that the current state is looking like it's going to lock with the future state of the wave. And now we play. And now, of course, Viego should also see this. Now, if we're playing it from Viego's perspective, we do 3 camps into top side. And now here, we can see that our bot lane hasn't warded on the current wave, which means that because they haven't warded on the current wave, this is the current wave here, they're going to have to ward on the future wave, or they're going to have a hard time farming it. Now, if the future wave, or the lane state, as the third wave ends up arriving and locks here, looks like it's gankable, then Viego should also come down for the counter attack. Realistically, both players should just ward here on the second wave and then not actually force Viego to come down. Because if Viego comes down, it's a loss of tempo. It really is a loss of gold for the jungler because he has to come down. Which means that if the opposing jungler doesn't choose to answer this gank and doesn't actually do it and doesn't feel like he wants to take the 3v3, then Viego's losing out. If he does, of course, and the angle is good, it's easy win. As we can see, Graves shows up. But Graves shows up where? He shows up as the third wave is locking. And there's more excess casters from the second wave. And so now, because Graves... So now this is really a weird position, right? Let's assume that... Let's go under the assumption that none of this is happening. For a minute, let's assume that the gank doesn't take place. Okay? Let's assume for a minute that Graves doesn't come down. Let's assume for a minute that both of these players are still standing here. Let's assume for a minute that these players are happy and they're chilling and they warded. This doesn't happen. Graves sees the ward, doesn't choose to take the gank. Instead, just, does this, maybe does this, and then, does this, or maybe bases after or whatever, right? Doesn't matter. Looking at just the minions, and just looking at the minions here, we can easily see that the current wave state, the current state of the wave, ignoring all of the champions on the screen, the current state of the wave is there is an excess blue over red, which means that the wave is pushing in. We already know that standing in this zone is bad. We've already determined this from our previous lessons. And so now the current state we have to do something. before the future state arrives. Now, let's say we don't do anything. Okay, let's say we do nothing with the current state. Well, then that means the future wave state, which is the fourth wave, it will lock. And if it locks, we're trapped in the lane for longer. We don't want to do that. So what do we do for the current state? Well, we crash it. We crash the current state. Ideally, we crash the current state so the future state, or the future wave state, on the fourth wave doesn't lock with 3 and then put us in a really crap position. Now let's say, for example, hypothetically again, removing the idea of champions, just looking at the minion waves. Let's say hypothetically that both laners on the red side are low. Enemy jungle on the right side can't do anything. Let's say he's pathing from bottom to top, hypothetically. Again, this is really crucial that we understand hypotheticals when we discuss League of Legends, because League is a very fluid game. It's very easy, very simple game, conceptually. But these concepts can be changed. Like immediately based on certain variables, like the jungler not being able to respond. Now, again, moving back to my example, let's assume that all of the champions are not on the screen. We're just looking at the waves. Well, if the opposing red side bot lane was really low, let's say they're really, really low and they're diveable, and the opposing red side jungler isn't going to respond because he's pathing to top side, let's say, or maybe he shows top side, we know there's no response. Well, then it's different. Then that means in the current state, we should slow push to build the future state wave, which is the fourth wave, and then crash the entire thing into them. So it's different. There's two things we're looking at here. The first concept, we're looking to crash the current wave state because we know the future wave state will force us on a freeze. In the second scenario, when we know the opposing enemy is low and we can dive, well, now the future wave state works differently. We can slow push the current wave state, and then we can build up the future wave state, and then crash the entire thing for a dive. The difference is the slow push on the current state versus the crash on the current state. The current state is where the action has to take place. The future state is a byproduct of the current state. That's something we have to really understand. Now, what are we looking at when we look at this? Where are our eyes when we look at this? It's my Word document. Where is it? There it is. Okay, so where are our eyes when we look at this? We already determined this. The current wave state, future wave state. Current wave state will determine the future wave state. The future wave state, of course, will just be based on how the minions in the current wave state are looking. Now, where are my eyes looking? So when you look at the game or you look at the map, there's two things that are happening. You're looking at something and you're gathering some form of information. Based on that information, you are then your action will change. So your action changes based on where you're looking. Why this is so important is, well, what are you looking at? What is your vision? Your vision determines your information. Your information determines your play. Well, what we look at is we look at the current wave state first, especially for jungling. For jungling and we're taking our camps and we're FKing through the map, we want to look at our current wave. So like here, right, for example, the current wave state is that Garen, now he can't freeze this, of course, because he's really low, and if K'Sante is walking up, he's just going to crash the wave. But disregarding the champions, only looking at the waves, we can determine that there's an excess red over blue, which means that this wave will lock on the future wave state if these minions on the blue side are not immediately killed. Mainly because this wave is so close. Now, if this wave was further away, let's say it's coming out of the nexus, and there's less blues and we know this wave is going to crash, at that point we can determine that the current wave state is already crashing, and so the future wave state will buffer the next wave and therefore will push back towards the opposing side in the future waves. So if we've determined this interaction is interaction A, we can determine that, let's say interaction A can crash before interaction B, which is the next wave, ends up arriving. B will buffer, or sorry, the writing is really, really abysmal. B will buffer, C, D, E, and everything after that will then return into the opposing player. This in itself is also kind of a more macro future state of how the lane is being played. Of course, you can also look at it in this perspective as well, but looking at it from the most simple perspective or the most basic viewpoint, we can see that this is the current state because it is on our screen and this is where the interaction is taking place, and this is the future state. Let's say there's more blue minions. Let's say that this wave is closer as it actually is here on the screen. Well, we can determine that the current wave state will lock with the future wave state, which means that now, because there's a lock, again, disregarding the champions, we can assume that the opposing red side top laner has to crash. In order for him to crash, he has to play somewhere in this square upwards, which means that, or this rectangle, which means that now he's approachable by the jungler. Because he's approachable by the jungler, perhaps his jungler realizes that, and so his jungler will then approach through here. And this is how you start seeing 2v2s. This is the breakdown of when something happens on the map. Of course, this can be taken a step further, because then this in itself is determined based on, well, at which quadrant is the jungler at? And this is determined based on the state of the game. And again, this is stuff we will look at more and more into detail, and you will become more and more practiced at determining what is the right play. But that does take time. It's really crucial that you start getting your eyes and your mind used to looking at the right things. Okay, so this again is just another example of future and current wave states. Now, looking here, going back to this, where are my eyes looking at? You're looking at the current wave first. Okay, we're looking at the current wave. Now what do we do? But what is the interaction of the current wave? Well, the interaction of the current wave we just described. It looks like it's frozen because there's more reds. Okay, it looks like it's frozen because there's more reds than blues. Great. Well, what do we do now? The second thing is you look at the future wave state. Okay, well, where is the future wave state? It looks like the future wave state is quite close, which means that it should freeze if no one actually interacts with this wave. Because the red minions aren't going to kill the blue minions quick enough for the red minions to be thrown into the tower for the next wave not to buffer. Or to be able to buffer, sorry. Okay? So we can determine that this is a freeze in the current wave state, and that the future wave state is just going to add on to that freeze. So now we have determined what the interaction for both the current wave state and the future wave state are. Well, this essentially lets us determine the entirety of the lane. It allows us to determine the lane state. Now, if Garen was full HP and Cassante is, let's say, no HP, well, then it looks like we're winning top, because it's a permafreeze. This means that we could take a 2v2 topside if we're winning. This means that even if we take a 2v2 topside, or let's say we gank topside as a jungler on blue side, and opposing jungler has priority on the topside quadrant, it means that this could actually become a 2v2. And if you lose 2v2 inside of the wave, then that's not the play to make. You don't have to give it to them. You don't have to give them that play. This is the same thing as a support roaming to a lane. This is the same thing as a jungler. This is the same thing as a mid laner moving. This is the same thing as bot lane, both in unison, moving towards mid lane or top lane. It is crucial for you to understand. Look at the current wave state. What is the interaction? Okay, so now you know the current wave state and you know the interaction, what is happening in that current screen. Then you look at the future wave state, and then you determine the interaction of that. Based on all of the information you've gathered through these, you can then determine the lane state. You can determine how the lane is being played. Why is it important to understand game state? So when I say game state and lane state, I really just mean the same thing. Lane state, game state, whatever, right? So you can even substitute this to game state instead of lane state. But why is this important? Why do we need this? This is what we need. This is what we're determining. But this is what we must determine. Okay? Well, why is this important? Why do we have to determine the lane state? Or the game state, I guess you can call it. It's the same thing. Well, the game state allows you to understand what your next move is. Right? There's only a few moves you can make in League. Right? You have like maybe 2 or 3 options. Let's say hypothetically. You don't have that many options. You have like 2 or 3 options. But these 2 or 3 options are only based on the understanding of game state. When you don't understand game state, well, now you have 100+ options because now you don't have any model to follow. So if you have 100,000 options, you're not going to know what your next move is. But because you've determined what the game state is through looking at current state and future state and looking at how these two things interact with each other, you can determine this. Once you've determined this, it's very crucial to understand that, well, it's not crucial necessarily, but it's very easy is a better word to explain it with. It's very easy to know what your next move is. Once you know what your move is, eventually, the more and more you practice it, you'll understand what the enemy can do. Because the enemy, just like you, also has maybe only 2 or 3 options. Then the game becomes a game of language. The game of language is really just these few options conversing with each other in the form of what you see as League of Legends. Again, looking at the idea of current wave states and future wave states, we're going to be looking at a real-time example against, or with EDG against IG. Again, 2 really, really talented teams in the LPL with a lot of talented players in both rosters. We're going to be just quickly analyzing some of the concepts in real time to show you some real examples of this happening and what it leads to. Now, I haven't seen the game yet. I have not seen this game, but we will be able to predict everything that is happening, at least in the early stages of the game, because we're not going to cover the whole thing. This is really just a brief example. Before it occurs, and again, you can then use this process of thinking in your own games to find success. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. Well, already we see that Jax is having some fun. Sejuani forced to flash there. We can see that the second wave ends up arriving. Second wave just hits the tower. 2:30 is generally when the third wave is arriving, and I really want you to pay attention to the minimap on the bottom right here, okay? Really, everything else on the screen should just be in your peripheries. Of course, you can look at it, but really, we're paying attention. We're bringing into awareness the waves coming out of the Nexus. Okay, we're not counting them and putting them in an Excel sheet or anything. All we're doing is we're just consciously aware of these waves. In a more simple sense, we can just call this A, we can call this B. Every time it comes out, we can just call this A, call it B. Call it A, future wave state is B, current wave state is A. Current wave state is A because it's next to us, future wave state is B because it's arriving. So you do not have to overcomplicate this. League is a very simple game. It has a lot of complexities in it. However, even those complexities are, when we look at the grand scope of things, very, very simple. As you can see, Maokai goes ahead and takes the invade, mainly because he knows how delayed Sejuani is. We can see how the third wave ends up arriving. It does end up buffering, and this is what I was talking about when I say buffer. As you can see, the third wave is not necessarily, not much that IG can really do with the third wave, other than maybe crash it and find a base. If they do throw out all of their spells now towards it, of course, if they were looking for a base on the third wave, they would have been able to, they could have played 2 a little bit slower. But I'm not entirely sure what they did. But as you can see, the third wave is in a state where it's bouncing back, also slightly buffering, allowing IG to, if wanting, could just hard crash and then look for a base, assuming that the opposing team isn't able to get the damage off on the wave immediately. That is a Varus support, I just realized. Wow. What has happened to this game? It's very interesting. I actually really like that Varus support. Sounds obnoxious and very strong in lane. With Draven as well. Draven, again, is a pick we see. I've seen a lot of LPL games primarily picking Draven. I think it's mostly LPL that picks Draven here. I've not seen it in NA, or unless maybe I missed it. But again, as we can see, the fourth wave ends up arriving in bottom lane, and the fourth wave and the fifth wave are pushing out. Of course, now they don't have to necessarily push out because it really is dependent on what IG wants to do with the wave. As you can see, Draven is just autoing the fourth wave, which means that they are looking to crash the fourth wave. This is a classic example of doing really nothing and just constantly crashing the wave under the assumption that they can just out brute force the opposing laner. And that's fine. It's not good, but it's acceptable because if you're able to do it properly, you can still win the lane, and it's really a staple way of what a lot of bot lanes do. And I'm not going to say it's good because it's not good. There are better ways to approach the sequencing of the waves that we see IG's bottom lane attempting to do. And because again, we're never going to find, now again, we can look at this from our concepts when we talked about future wave states and current wave states. The current wave state is the fourth wave interacting with itself, right? We're just seeing this interaction, and we can determine that. Well, okay, again, let's determine using this, right? Well, look at the current wave. What is the current wave? Okay, the current wave is fourth, and it looks like there's more blues than reds, and it seems that the wave is just pushing out. Okay, well, we don't want to lock because we're not going to find a base timer by crashing this wave and then basing on the fifth wave. That's not a base timer. It's not a cannon wave. We'll lose tempo if we do that. If you don't understand that yet, that's okay. We will cover that more in detail in future lessons. But we're not looking to base. So now we're going to see that IG, well, what is the interaction? Well, it seems that the interaction is a potential freeze if this wave doesn't crash, which means that we should just crash this wave. What is the future wave looking like now? Well, the future wave hasn't come out of the well, it's out of the Nexus, but it's at inhibitor, so there's a lot of time. We don't have to immediately crash. We can play with it. We can chill. We don't have to just start throwing everything into the wave yet because we still have time before the next wave arrives. However, if we don't crash, the interaction with the future wave, which will be more prevalent as the next wave gets closer and closer to the current state or the current wave, right? Because the future wave will become more and more occurrent the closer it is to the current wave state. Of course, if it's far away, you can choose to not crash immediately and trade and fight and do other things. But the closer and closer the future wave state comes, the more important it is for you to make the right play on the current wave. Because the future wave will only amplify that. If it's a good thing, then the future wave state will amplify your advantage. If you play the current state poorly, the future state is something that you have to suffer on. Then, of course, we can get into detail. We can then talk about how we want to recover a bad wave state, but that's not in this lesson. I'm not going to talk to you about how to recover if things go south. We'll talk about that later in a future lesson, but that does tie into this. This is the basis of the future lessons. So now, ideally, we just want to crash 5 before 6 arrives because we really don't have a reason to. It's not that if we keep autoing these minions. If we keep autoing these minions to the point where we can't. Now we can, of course, we can build 5. Right? Like if we slow push this wave and we build 5, we can base on it because 6 is a cannon wave. But we're not going to be able to just do that here. As you can see how Draven is playing it out. Showing a bit of top lane. Next wave is a cannon. That is the 6th wave. Okay, so again, moving toward back towards the map here. Maokai goes back into his red buff. Sejuani still suffering, unfortunately. Only able to take really the first quadrant of her jungle, considering the invade from Jax. Not going to be able to find anything in bottom lane. Maokai moves up to top side. Wow, Azir is just so far ahead in this lane right now. And then again, now the top lane is determined by what is happening. Okay, so, well, let's look at this, right? The current wave state, again, is here. This is the current wave state. Again, this is the future wave state. If there's more blues than reds, we have to hover to get the crash off on the future wave state. If there's more reds than blues, and it doesn't look diveable for EDG, in the perspective of IG, so we're under the perspective of Maokai, right? As Maokai, if the future wave state, or if the current wave state, sorry, more blues than reds, the future wave state needs to be crashed before, or the current wave state needs to be crashed before the future wave state ends up arriving, because that will be a freeze. If there's more reds than blues, Maokai doesn't have to worry too much, because the wave is coming into Jax, and therefore he can farm, or he can look for a gank. Now, of course, if he goes for a gank, he has to then consider 2v2. He has to consider support realms. He has to consider champions. He has to consider items. He has to consider minion waves. Because the waves will take aggro if you fight. All of these things will be considered. But that's the thing. As we went back, or as we discussed, that only gives us maybe like 2 or 3 options. It's either we go or we don't go. And these are the 2 or 3 options that are also played against the opponent, who also has 2 or 3 options. And then it's just language. The game becomes language at that point. Sejuani takes the invade because it seems like Fiora could have priority, but it doesn't look like it's going to be possible. And now, as we can see, doesn't want to take the 2v2, and it's completely acceptable to not take the 2v2 there. There's no reason to take the 2v2 there. Especially because Maokai can respond. And so Maokai does the Grump. And again, we can see that Jax is making sure that the wave is crashed before the future state wave arrives. Now, let's say, for example, again, only looking at top lane. This wave wasn't crashed fast enough, and this wave here locks with this wave, which means that now the current state is still a freeze, and the future state will continue to be a freeze if we don't do something. And so we have to crash the current state to make sure that the future state of the wave isn't bad for us. Now, this is changeable because if the opposing jungler isn't going to gank, which it's unlikely that he will here, because we see him, obviously, then you don't have to hover and he can crash it by himself. That's possible. If the Jax can't crash by himself, Maokai will hover. But that doesn't really matter, because those things you will be able to determine the more and more experience you gain from the game. The most crucial thing to understand here is the basis of everything is really looking at how the minions are interacting, because minions, the way the waves interact with the map is the way to determine whether something is going to happen versus something is not. Again, just to clarify, when you don't when you can't understand, when you don't understand this concept, you're going to have 100 different options versus another low elo player with 100 different options. And this is why low elo is so random. But if you determine this, you only have 2 to 3 options. So does your lane opponent, so does your jungle opponent, or even your lane opponent. Now the game has a model to it. Now the game becomes a language that can be understood. You're not going to have a language with 1,000 alphabets. It's going to get complicated. You want a language with not 1,000 different variables or characters, and something that can be easily understood. That is the whole purpose of language, really. And the more and more you understand League of Legends, the more you're going to understand that this is nothing more than just a language between players.